In this video, I'm making a 3D Pokemon card illustration. I've been playing this silly little Pokemon phone game where you collect cards and battle. Very occasionally, you get a super rare immersive card where the camera zooms into the illustration and then flies around in 3D. When I first got one of these, I felt a childlike sense of wonder. So I'm going to try to recreate that feeling in what I make in this video. This is the Pokemon we're working with today. His name is Goomy. He's a dragon-type Pokemon, which I find very endearing. You look at him and you just want to be supportive. So, you know what, Goomy? Yeah, you are a dragon. Hang in there, buddy. I liked the idea of setting this in a cave, and I found these mushroom guys that I thought were kind of fun. So I decided on a magical mushroom cavern. I started by roughly modeling the characters using Metaballs. It's a very goopy method of making 3D shapes, perfect for these blobby characters. Goomy is basically a sphere with a sort of goopy trail and ears like a nudibranch. You know, these guys. I really love this squiggly mouth shape. When he opens it, he reminds me of a kid that's recently lost some teeth. It gives him a really charming, asymmetrical smile. I used the same blobby approach for this mushroom guy's head. For the stems, I drew some 3D tubes and tapered them. I kind of disagree with how they depict the mushrooms. They're pretty straight and rigid, and I just wanted them to be more floppy. Are mushrooms floppy? Yeah, that's floppy. Next, I worked on this dude, and something about this individual is sort of sinister. I guess it must be the hollow eyes and the emotionless smile. He reminds me of this turtle in my parents' backyard. And there's our cast of characters. A bit of a shabby crew, but I was just getting started. And things aren't supposed to look good in the beginning. I wanted Goomy to be hanging out on a big stack of rocks in a giant cavern. So I started by blocking in the rocks with cubes. I wanted these mushroom guys to be glowing and just looking at the Goomster. Not in a scary way, they're just kind of curious. I added some colors and a little lighting just to start thinking about it. I thought it would be cool and honestly kind of magical to have a bunch of floating spores off in the distance. They have the same emotional effect as a lovely, starry night sky. In 3D, it's pretty easy to take a thing and just scatter it all over the place randomly. I wanted the camera to start close and then fly backwards majestically to reveal a massive cave and some other Pokemon guys. Something about the spores flying past the camera and then quickly fading off into the distance really intensifies the feeling of soaring. And then the grand finale is this guy. With the camera move roughed in, I went back to modeling. I didn't want this scene to be just rocks, so I added a giant mushroom forest. And I think that's fun. For the rocks, I scattered a bunch of cubes in a clump. This is the same technique I did with the spores, except the cubes are bigger and closer together. It's just random scattering. I was feeling like I understood Goomy a lot more than when I started, so I remodeled him and added some textures. At this point, I was sculpting and painting everything with the camera angle in mind. I could exaggerate the shapes without worrying about how it looked from every position. I did a lot of experimenting with the sculpting tools, and from that, I learned that he looked pretty cute with a pointy cheek. Next, I gave Morlul a bit of a design refresh, and this time, I made his head more square. I needed to give this guy with the mushroom sombrero a better pose, but I realized I didn't know anything about him, and what I learned might shock you. Shinotic. Its flickering spores lure in prey and put them to sleep. Once this Pokemon has its prey snoozing, it drains their vitality with its fingertips. With this extra bit of context, it really seems like they're going to try to eat Goomy. And Goomy, he's lovely and perfect, but you know he's not a fast runner. I've been thinking of this guy more like a kindly narrator, sort of like the rooster from the 1973 animated classic, Robin Hood.
Well, we folks of the animal kingdom.
Let me just show you. I'm just going to adapt this rooster's monologue.
You know, there's been a heap of legends and tall tales about the great Goomy. All different, too. Seems like nobody thinks to ask the folks who are actually around to see it. Well, this is the story of what really happened. in that magical mushroom grotto.
Anyway, I was struggling to come up with a pose where he wasn't either standing or sitting. And then I realized he's really just got to be doing a little dance. That was the only way forward, honestly. So I decided to base it off of this card. Thought about leaving the feet this goofy and big, but I ended up going with regular size. It was time to start thinking about the lighting. I initially was trying to use my little math problems to create areas of light and shadow, but this never looks exactly how I want, and I wasn't really feeling it. So I decided to just paint it by hand. I made his mouth bigger, and that made a difference. This dude is delighted. He's having a real hoot now that he doesn't have to worry about his vitality being drained. Speaking of, if you're having a real hoot watching this video, you'd be helping me out a lot by leaving a comment. It helps me grow my channel. Also, like and subscribe. I wanted these mushrooms to feel like they were glowing from their core. For that, I did a shader trick using the layer weight node. The parts of the mushroom that are facing the camera are black, and as the surface starts to curve away, the color moves closer to white. So the black at the core follows the camera, sort of like the eyes of a spooky portrait in a haunted mansion. I then used the resulting gradient to make the mushroom bright in the middle and darker along the edges. I added some highlights to his eyes and skin to make him look more wet. Up until this point, I had been painting with the simplest brush in the business. It was just a circle. I still wanted to work some texture in there, so I took a bit of a field trip to the physical world. I drew this texture with marker and then scanned it in. Then I layered it with the stuff I already painted. I used a compositing trick where I took all the pixels and pushed them around in random directions. This made the texture rougher and more unified. And by the way, if you want to learn more about this rough edge technique, I have a few videos about it on my Patreon. It was time to give the spores a little more love. I drew 36 star shapes and then used a node group that I snatched from my pal Alan to distribute them randomly at the points that I had made earlier. And if you're thinking they look too much like snowflakes, let's just say it snows in this cave. That's part of it, okay? Next, I posed the Morlals. I wanted them to feel more playful and curious, and I tried to embrace that floppiness that I thought was missing from the card illustrations. And I just kept painting and shading. In the close-up, it didn't really feel like a cave. It could have just as easily been the night sky behind them. So I added some rocks up top to make the space feel smaller, at least initially. I also drew this black hole shape, which was perfect for adding some painterly glow to the mushrooms. I made this gradient to use as fog. I was pretty proud of it. I was avoiding painting the sombrero, but I had finally run out of other things to do. I painted it in Krita, then projected the 2D art back onto the 3D model. I was close to the end. All that was left were some tiny details. I did some compositing and a few extra shader tricks, and I was done. Now it's time for some reflection. I wish I would have spent more time thinking about what the illustration looks like as an actual Pokemon card, or even coming up with ideas on what makes a good Pokemon card illustration. To me, this feels really flat. It's less like a movie and more like a play, if that makes sense. They're all lined up on a stage and we're just looking at them straight on. Anyway, that's all we got for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in making 3D stuff like this, I've got a little Discord server, a Patreon, and an Instagram, if you're into that. Links for those are in the description. Okay, goodbye.